Hey everyone, this is Claude Johnson from the Black Fives Foundation. How are you today? Hey, so check this out. A couple of weeks ago, I was on here and I was telling you the story about the time when Howard University came to visit New York City to play in Harlem at the Manhattan Casino against the St. Christopher Club, which was a local all-black team that was sponsored by the St. Philip's Church, one of the largest black churches in the country. And this was a game that ended up in a tie because a last-second shot, the referees couldn't decide whether to count it or not since the final whistle was blown while the ball was in midair. And back then they didn't have instant replays, and so they talked it over and decided to just call the whole game a tie. But because they called it a tie and they didn't have overtime, they just decided, okay, forget that. We won't know who won this game, and it's not going to be determined today. Instead, they scheduled another game, and that game was going to be the tiebreaker as an entirely new game. Now, the reason they did this was pretty clever because that first game that ended up in a tie had about 3,000 fans. So at 50 cents a ticket with $2 for box seats, that actually ended up being quite lucrative in terms of the money, even counting for inflation and everything. And so this was 107 years ago, and they scheduled that game for April 17th, 1914, which is 107 years ago tonight, which was a Friday night. And they replayed the whole game, again got lots of people. And there's something interesting about this game that I want to tell you about today because it's really meaningful in terms of the history of black basketball. So the anticipation for this game was really high, and Howard came back and they staged the same exact game at the Manhattan Casino, and this was lucrative for Howard because at their home court, which was True Reformers Hall, right across the street from Ben's Chili Bowl in Washington, D.C., near Howard University, for any of you former alums or people who know that area, True Reformers Hall only held at most about 700 people. So this was, much more in terms of the potential revenue, even when they counted the train ride and all the accommodations, which the host team normally would be responsible for. So they played this game, and one of the things that went into the tiebreaker is that the guy who ran, the rector who ran St. Philip's Church, his name was Reverend Dr. Hutchins Chew Bishop. He had a real problem with the first game. He was very upset, and the church was very upset, and for three reasons, okay? The first reason is that there was gambling that took place in the stands in plain view, and apparently it just went on and nobody stopped it. And Reverend Bishop was very concerned about that because gambling was a misdemeanor, it's against the law, and he didn't want the church in any way to be connected with that, because if they were, then that meant that they were somehow a party to something that was illegal, and obviously you couldn't do that in terms of the church. The second thing he was upset about is that this game was played, talking about the one that ended up in a tie, was played during Lent. So in Catholic religion and some forms of Christianity, actually Lent is the season that's 40 days that happens the 40 days before Easter. It's always a different 40 days because Easter itself falls on a different day depending on the lunar calendar and the spring solstice and full moons and stuff like that. You can look it up. But the 40 days, it starts with Mardi Gras and Fat Tuesday, and that's the last day before Ash Wednesday, which is the beginning of Lent, which is when you're supposed to abstain from all kinds of things, entertainment, including basketball. So there was an unwritten but very strict rule in black basketball during that time, which was that you must not play a game during Lent. There was always the last pre-Lenten game, which was any time and any date up till Fat Tuesday. And then there was always the first post-Lenten game, and everybody looked forward to those because they were always really big. And these games, they always had an orchestra that played before, during, and after the game. It was a big, meaningful social event during that time. And so, this was a big deal, okay? Now, this tiebreaker game was scheduled on April 17th because that was the first Friday after Easter in 1914. Now, this leads us to the third reason why Reverend Bishop was upset, and it's that this entire game had been scheduled and arranged and promoted by an outside party who was a white booking agent named Nat Strong, who was notorious for gouging Negro Leagues baseball teams in return for giving them permission to play on the fields that he controlled, the baseball fields up and down the East Coast. So people didn't like him, but somehow he snuck in here and was able to cut a deal with the Manhattan Casino in which he was bringing in these teams, but yet somehow or another, St. Christopher Club and St. Philip's Church didn't make any money off of it because they didn't control the gate receipts or anything that had to do with the contract. So from that tie game until the April 17th game, Reverend Bishop said, no, we're going to end that. We're never doing this again. And in fact, Nat Strong, who made a pretty good effort to insert himself into the revenue stream of black basketball, and he did it for a reason. It's because black basketball was becoming very lucrative. It had gone from 100 spectators a few years before that to 200 spectators, and then 400 spectators a game, and then 1,000, 1,200 spectators a game. Now, by 1914, it was 3,000, and teams were coming from other states and other cities to play in New York City because it was so popular. It was the center of black basketball at that time. And so what's important about that is that Reverend Bishop, he was a visionary black leader at the time, and it was a cultural move. It was flexing their muscle. It was basically leveraging the power that they had to say, okay, we're not going to do this a second time. And so Nat Strong was cut out of that picture, and in fact, the game was put under the auspices of the St. Philip's Men's Guild, which was the next age level up from the St. Christopher Club, which was just another subgroup of St. Philip's Church. And they ended up kicking Nat Strong, Mr. Strong, completely out of black basketball, and he would never return after that. So what's important about that is that's the first time in black basketball when the people who were the authorities, the managers, the promoters, flexed their empowerment and were able to say, no, this is our economic baby. This is what we created. Stay out of it, okay? Because without that, the game in terms of African-American community would not have been able to grow and evolve the way that it would over the next several years. So getting back to the game though, it turns out that St. Christopher Club ended up winning this game 29-17. It was an easy win, but it didn't matter because of these other factors that made this game so important. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's really a way to bring it back around because HBCUs are important. Black economic empowerment is important. Changing this game in terms of saying, wait a minute, why was there even this segregated period of basketball in the first place? Starts a conversation that we can have about white supremacy and systemic racism and difficult topics for everybody, I'm sure, in some cases harder and easier than others. But these are conversations that we have to have. That's why we say make history now. It's not that we can change history, but we can change what we do with that history. And sometimes it's for the better of everybody, for everyone's improvement. So with that, I would just like to say thank you for listening. You can feel free to visit our website, black5s.org. If you like what you hear and you'd like to donate to our cause, which is to research, preserve, showcase, teach, and honor the pre-NBA history of African Americans in basketball, you can definitely do that by going to give.black5s.org. And of course, you gotta check out the gear by going to shop.black5s.org. Hope that you've enjoyed this segment. There's going to be more to come. You can tell I have fun doing this. There's just thousands and thousands and thousands, practically, of stories, and we're excited about it. And so for that, I'd like to just say thank you again, Claude Johnson, for the Black Fives Foundation. Make history now.